Before the creation of man, there was a war that shook the very foundations of heaven and nearly destroyed the sacred garden known as Eden. Few realize that this garden, which many believe was prepared solely for humanity, was actually reserved for beings of another nature, guarded fiercely by entities far older than time itself. These beings, known in ancient texts as those who burn with purity, stood watch over Eden long before Adam ever set foot there. Eden, this mystical place, was not just a paradise for mankind, but a cosmic battleground, a realm of power and glory where celestial decisions were made and divine thrones were aligned. The war for dominion over this sacred land began with envy, rebellion, and a desire for control. But why would such a perfect, holy place need protection, even before sin had entered the world? It was a space of unimaginable beauty and divine purpose, yet under constant threat from forces that wished to claim it for their own. The battle was not just between good and evil, but between those who sought to corrupt what was pure and those who stood as guardians, ensuring that the sanctity of Eden remained intact. It was a conflict that caused parts of Eden to be sealed off, erased from existence, and hidden behind layers of cryptic symbols. Yet, fragments of the story remain, hidden but waiting to be uncovered. Ancient texts, including the mystical teachings of Jewish and Mesopotamian traditions, reveal the truth of this battle, one that predates the fall of man and echoes through the corridors of time. The cherubim with flaming swords are not just symbols. They are reminders of the divine conflict, the barrier between light and darkness, and the eternal struggle that continues to shape our world. They guard the way to the tree of life, not just from man, but from those who once tried to usurp what was never meant to be theirs. This ancient war in Eden is not just a story of the past. It is a prophecy, a pattern that points to the eternal battle for dominion over creation, an unseen war that still rages in the hearts and souls of mankind. In the beginning, before Adam was even formed from the dust, there were beings who watched over the sacred space known as Eden. These entities were not human, nor were they created for the purpose of ruling over earthly kingdoms. They were the unseen guardians, celestial beings who stood at the threshold of a paradise that was not meant for man. The Bible speaks of cherubim, those mysterious creatures with wings and fire, stationed at the entrance to Eden to prevent access to the tree of life. But the story goes deeper, much deeper than we realize. These guardians were not mere symbols of protection. They were the first line of defense in a cosmic struggle, one that would shape the fate of all creation. Before the first man walked upon the soil of Eden, this sacred space had already been claimed by beings of another nature, beings who existed in harmony with God, but were not human. The ancient texts, hidden in the corners of mystical traditions, hint at a reality that was far more complex than the simple garden we often imagine. Eden, before it became the home of Adam, was a place of divine counsel, a meeting ground for the Elohim, the heavenly beings who served at the Creator's side. It was here that decisions were made, thrones were established, and the destiny of the universe was quietly shaped. But why would such a perfect, holy place need protection? Why would Eden, in all its splendor, require the vigilance of celestial beings? The answer lies in the purpose of Eden itself. It was not merely a resting place or a home for man. It was a symbol of the divine order, a place where the forces of light and darkness would collide. The unseen guardians of Eden were placed there to protect its sanctity from forces that would seek to corrupt it. Even before humanity existed, the powers of darkness had already set their sights on this sacred ground, intending to twist its purpose and claim it as their own. These ancient beings, these guardians of purity, were not passive in their protection. They were active participants in a spiritual war that was far older than mankind itself. In ancient Jewish and Mesopotamian texts, the guardians of Eden are described as fiery, burning beings, whose very presence served as a divine firewall, ensuring that no impurity could enter the garden. Their job was not only to protect Eden from external forces, but also to preserve its divine purpose, which had yet to be fully realized. These beings stood watch not because Eden was imperfect, but because it was a spiritual battleground, a place where the forces of light and darkness had already begun to clash. The question we must ask ourselves is why these guardians existed before humanity even arrived. Why was Eden such a prized space? And why did it need such protection? The answers can be found in the cosmic drama that played out long before man's creation. The unseen guardians were not merely preventing entry, they were preventing the cosmic forces of darkness from claiming what was never meant to be theirs. In their eyes, Eden was not just a place to be protected. It was a symbol of God's divine order, a place where purity and light were meant to reign forever. This cosmic struggle over Eden is the backdrop to a battle that would change the course of history. The fall of Lucifer and his rebellion against God was not the first time spiritual beings sought to usurp the divine throne. Long before the fall of man, a group of celestial beings, driven by envy and a desire for power, had already set their eyes on Eden. They believed that Eden, this sacred place, was their rightful domain. They sought to claim it as their own, to make it the center of their own power. This was the beginning of the war for Eden, a war that would not only shape the spiritual realm, but would set the stage for humanity's own fall. The battle for dominion over Eden was not a simple conflict between good and evil. It was a struggle for control of creation itself. These beings, driven by pride and rebellion, sought to dethrone God and place themselves in the center of the universe. They believed that they could establish their own kingdom in Eden, one where they would reign supreme. This was not a battle for territory alone. It was a battle for divine authority. The stakes were not just the garden, but the very foundation of creation. And so, the war for Eden began. It was a conflict that shook the heavens, one that was fought not with swords, but with spiritual forces far beyond human comprehension. The guardians of Eden stood firm, protecting the sacred space from these rebellious beings. But the conflict was not easily won. Parts of Eden were lost, erased from existence, and hidden behind layers of metaphors and symbols in ancient scriptures. The story of this war was obscured, its details scattered across time and lost in the shadows of forgotten texts. But the echoes of this ancient battle remain, waiting to be uncovered. The guardians of Eden, these beings who burned with purity, were the first defenders of creation. They stood watch over Eden, not because they were afraid of the dark, but because they knew what was at stake. Eden was not just a beautiful garden. It was a symbol of the divine order, a representation of what God had intended for creation. The forces of darkness sought to corrupt that order, to claim Eden as their own. And so, the guardians stood firm, their fiery presence a barrier between the forces of light and the powers of darkness. This struggle for Eden is not just an ancient story. It is a pattern that continues to play out today in the hearts and minds of every person. The forces of light and darkness continue to battle for control of creation, and the question remains, who will reign over the garden? The battle for dominion over Eden is not just a cosmic event of the past. It is a spiritual war that continues in the unseen realms, a war that is fought in every soul. The guardians of Eden were not only tasked with protecting the garden from external threats, they were there to ensure that the divine purpose of creation would not be corrupted. They were the keepers of purity, the defenders of the divine order. Their role was to remind us that Eden, in all its beauty, was not just a place of rest. It was a battleground, a place where the forces of light and darkness would collide for control over creation. As we move forward in the story, we begin to see how this cosmic battle would shift from the heavens to the earth. The battle for Eden was far from over, and it would soon involve humanity itself. But first, the forces of darkness would have to face their greatest challenge, the arrival of man. And it was in this moment that the true significance of Eden would be revealed. The conflict over Eden was not just about the garden. It was about the very nature of creation itself. And in the end, it was not the forces of darkness who would reign over Eden, but the Creator himself. The war for Eden, though ancient, continues to shape our world today. As the guardians of Eden stood firm, so too must we stand firm in the face of the spiritual battles that continue to unfold around us. The battle for dominion over Eden is not just a story of the past. It is a story that is still being written in the hearts of those who seek to reclaim what was lost. And as we continue this journey, we will see how the story of Eden connects to the story of man, and how the spiritual battle that began in the garden continues to shape our lives today. The battle for dominion over Eden was not only fought between the forces of light and darkness, but was also a spiritual clash that determined the destiny of creation itself. Those who sought to usurp the garden's sacredness believed they had the right to reign over it, not out of love for the land itself, but for the power it represented. It was a struggle for control over what was meant to be a divine space, untouched by rebellion or impurity. These rebellious beings, seeking to establish their kingdom within Eden, believed it was their right to claim it as their own, a throne outside of the Creator's authority. The concept of dominion, as outlined in Genesis, was clear. God created the earth, he planted Eden, and he placed man within it. But these celestial beings, who had once been part of the heavenly choir and served in God's presence, now turned their hearts away, believing they were entitled to the glory and power that belonged to the Creator alone. They desired dominion, not just over Eden, but over all of creation, and they saw Eden as the key to unlocking that power. Eden was not just a garden. It was a throne, a place of authority, and the seat from which dominion could be exercised over the earth. What began as a battle over the garden quickly turned into a cosmic rebellion. These spiritual beings, driven by envy and pride, sought to overthrow the Creator's design. The rebellion was not just an act of defiance, it was an attempt to establish a parallel kingdom, one where the rebellious beings would rule and humanity would never have the chance to inherit dominion. But their plans were thwarted by the presence of the unseen guardians of Eden, the Cherubim, who stood as a divine barrier guarding the way to the tree of life. As the battle raged, parts of Eden were ravaged and destroyed. The garden, once radiant with divine glory, bore the scars of this war. The once flawless beauty of Eden was marred, not just by the rebellion of spiritual beings, but also by the loss of innocence that would later come with Adam's fall. This celestial conflict wasn't simply a historical event, it was the first of many spiritual battles that would unfold throughout human history. These ancient accounts, though scattered across various mystical and apocryphal texts, reveal a picture of Eden that goes beyond its role as humanity's first home. It was a place of divine conflict, a battlefield between the forces of light and darkness. The guardians, those who burned with purity, played a vital role in ensuring that the divine purpose for Eden remained intact, preventing the rebellious forces from claiming it as their own. Their role was not merely to defend the physical garden, but to preserve its spiritual sanctity, to keep it from falling into the hands of those who sought to defile it. As the rebellious forces were cast out and sealed away, the gates of Eden were shut, and the garden was hidden from human eyes. The flaming swords of the cherubim remained, not just as symbols, but as spiritual sentinels, ensuring that no evil could ever enter again. But even as Eden was hidden, the war for its dominion was far from over. The victory of the light was not the end of the battle, but the beginning of a new chapter in the cosmic struggle. In the years that followed, humanity would be placed in Eden's place, but not in the fullness of the glory that had once been. The scarred garden that Adam entered was not the same as the one created in the beginning. The purity and holiness of Eden were now veiled, as if the Creator had placed a protective covering over it, shielding man from the full force of the spiritual realities that lay beneath. The original dominion over the earth was still in place, but the way back to the fullness of Eden had been closed off, and the journey to reclaim it would require a far greater sacrifice. The story of Eden's battle for dominion goes beyond the clash of celestial beings. It speaks to the struggle that continues today within the hearts of mankind. The war for Eden is not simply a tale of rebellion and divine judgment. It is the story of humanity's desire for control, for power, and for a return to the garden. We too, like the rebellious angels, face the temptation to seize dominion for ourselves, to claim what was never meant to be ours. In our modern lives, we face a battle for our own hearts, a struggle to choose between light and darkness, between submitting to the Creator's will or pursuing our own desires. Just as the ancient beings sought to make Eden their own, so too do we often seek to take what was never meant for us. But the story of Eden reminds us that true dominion is not gained through rebellion or force. It is only found through submission to the will of the Creator, who, in his wisdom, has laid out the path to true life. In the early days of Eden, the rebellion was met with divine protection. The flaming swords guarded the way, not just to the tree of life, but to the fullness of God's purpose for creation. The rebellious beings were cast out, but the story did not end there. The cosmic war that began in Eden would continue throughout history, reaching its climax in the coming judgment, where the forces of light and darkness would once again clash, but this time, the victory would be final. As we look at the story of Eden, we are reminded of the importance of guarding the sacred spaces in our own lives. Just as Eden was a sacred space meant to be kept pure, so too are the hearts of those who belong to the Creator. We must protect our hearts from the forces that seek to usurp dominion over them. The story of Eden serves as a warning to us, showing us that the battle for dominion is ongoing. It calls us to remember that our true inheritance lies not in the fleeting power of this world, but in the eternal victory of the Creator. The spiritual battle for Eden may have begun long ago, but it continues to this day, in the unseen realms and in the hearts of mankind. As we move forward in the story, we will see how this ancient conflict would eventually involve humanity, bringing us into the very heart of the cosmic struggle. The battle for dominion over creation is far from over, and it will require us to choose whose side we are truly on. As the guardians of Eden stood firm, so too must we stand firm in the face of the spiritual battles that continue to unfold around us. The war for Eden is not just a story of the past. It is a story that is still being written in the hearts of those who seek to reclaim what was lost. The aftermath of the great war for Eden left its mark, not just on the celestial realm, but also on the very fabric of creation. The once radiant beauty of the garden was now shrouded in a veil, its divine glory dimmed by the scars of battle. Eden, which had been a symbol of perfect communion between God and his creation, now stood as a fractured mirror of what it once was. The victory of the heavenly guardians was not without cost, and the garden, though still a sacred space, would no longer reflect the fullness of God's original design. It had been marked by the conflict, its purity forever altered by the forces that sought to claim it for themselves. As Adam entered the garden, he did so not as the first to tread upon its soil, but as a witness to the brokenness that had come before him. Eden, in its new form, was no longer the untouched paradise that God had created. It was a garden tainted by the remnants of the ancient war. The flaming swords of the cherubim, which once served as a divine barrier, now stood as a permanent reminder of the battle that had taken place. The peace that Adam was meant to experience in Eden was now a peace marred by the knowledge of the cosmic struggle that had preceded him. This shift in Eden's condition reflects a deeper truth about creation itself. The perfection of Eden was always meant to be a symbol of God's ideal for humanity, a place where man and God could walk together in harmony. But the war for dominion had broken that harmony, and Eden, in its diminished state, served as a reminder that God's plan had been temporarily thwarted by the forces of darkness. Though Adam was given dominion over the earth, the garden he inherited was not as pristine as the one originally designed. It was a garden that had been scarred by rebellion, and now man would be tasked with the responsibility of guarding and reclaiming what had been lost. This brings us to the heart of the human experience, the struggle to reconcile the brokenness of the world with the original purpose God intended. The war for Eden set the stage for humanity's own fall. It was not just a battle in the spiritual realm, it was a battle that would unfold in the hearts of men and women. Adam's failure to uphold the sanctity of Eden mirrored the failure of the rebellious celestial beings who sought dominion over the garden. In both cases, the desire for power and control led to the loss of what was originally given. The garden, once a symbol of divine authority and peace, became a place of separation, a place where man could no longer commune freely with God. Yet, despite the scars that Eden bore, it still held the promise of restoration. The loss of Eden was not the end of the story. God's plan for humanity did not end with the fall. The battle that began in the garden would continue through the ages, culminating in the ultimate restoration of what had been lost. This promise of restoration is woven throughout the scriptures, from Genesis to Revelation. The garden may have been lost, but God's eternal plan to bring about a new creation would never be thwarted. As we continue to explore the story of Eden, it becomes clear that the conflict in the garden is not just a historical event. It is a spiritual pattern that repeats itself throughout the pages of the Bible. The spiritual battle for dominion continues in the lives of believers today. Just as Eden was a battleground, so too is the heart of every person. The forces of light and darkness continue to vie for control of the soul, and the lessons of Eden remind us of the consequences of yielding to the forces of rebellion. In the final chapters of the Bible, the promise of Eden's restoration is revealed once again. In Revelation, we see a new heaven and a new earth, where the tree of life is once again present in the midst of the new Jerusalem. This new Eden will be free from the scars of the past, a place where the forces of darkness are finally defeated, and God's original plan for creation is fully realized. The war that began in Eden, though devastating, will ultimately end in victory. The flaming swords that once guarded the tree of life will be replaced by the glory of God, and His people will once again dwell in perfect communion with Him. This restoration of Eden is not just a future hope, it is a present reality for those who have been redeemed by the blood of Christ. The spiritual battle that began in Eden has been won, not through human effort, but through the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross. The veil that once separated humanity from God was torn, and access to the true tree of life was restored. This victory over sin and death is the ultimate restoration of Eden's promise. It is the fulfillment of God's plan to redeem creation and bring His people back to the paradise that was lost. The story of Eden, with all its beauty, rebellion, and loss, ultimately points to the eternal truth that God's plan will prevail. The battle for Eden was not just about the garden, It was about the restoration of creation itself. And though we may still face spiritual battles today, we can take comfort in knowing that the victory has already been won. The war for Eden is over, and the gates of the true paradise are open once again, inviting all who believe to enter and partake of the life that God has promised. This story is not just a distant memory of the past. It is the story that continues to unfold in the lives of those who walk by faith. The promise of Eden, the hope of restoration, is for us today. And as we walk through the challenges of life, we can be assured that the ultimate victory is ours through Christ, who has already conquered the forces of darkness and opened the way to the true garden of God's eternal presence. As we reflect on the ancient war that shook the heavens before Adam's creation, it becomes clear that the story of Eden is not just a tale of paradise lost. It is a profound narrative that reverberates through the corridors of time, echoing in our hearts and souls today. The battle for dominion over this sacred garden, fought between light and darkness, was not merely a celestial conflict, but a divine declaration that would shape the destiny of mankind. The guardians of Eden, the cherubim with their flaming swords, stood as the first line of defense, not just for a physical place, but for a cosmic order, a balance that has been under threat ever since the dawn of time. In the end, the battle was not only about the garden, it was about the very essence of God's creation, the divine authority he established, and the ongoing fight to preserve his will against the forces that seek to corrupt it. It is a battle that continues within us all. Just as Eden was a place where spiritual forces fought for dominion, our hearts and minds are constantly under siege by those same forces. The spiritual war that began in Eden extends far beyond the garden. It is a war that plays out in every moment of our lives, in every choice we make, in every thought that crosses our minds. When Adam and Eve were placed in Eden, they were not only entrusted with the beauty of the garden, but with the responsibility to uphold the sanctity of creation, to protect it from the forces that sought to destroy it. And though Eden was lost, the promise of restoration has never been abandoned. The victory won in the garden, though momentarily obscured by the fall of man, was ultimately secured through Christ. The cross, which seemed like a tragic loss, became the victory that reversed the curse of Eden, tearing down the walls of separation between humanity and God. Through Jesus, the gates of the true Eden, the kingdom of God, have been reopened to all who would choose to enter. This message of hope, of redemption, and of ultimate restoration is not just for a distant future. It is for the here and now. The war that began in Eden has been won, but the battle for our hearts continues. Every day, we are faced with choices that either bring us closer to the paradise God intended or lead us further away into the darkness of rebellion. The story of Eden serves as a reminder of the stakes, of the eternal conflict that we are all a part of. It calls us to remain vigilant, to guard our hearts, and to remember that, just as God had a plan to restore Eden, he also has a plan to restore us, to bring us back to the perfect communion he originally intended. So, as we walk through the challenges of life, remember that the victory has already been secured. The cosmic war for dominion over creation may have begun in Eden, but it was resolved at the cross. And as we look forward to the final restoration, to the coming of the new heaven and new earth, let us take comfort in knowing that our ultimate inheritance is secure. The garden may have been lost, but the kingdom of God is coming, and we are invited to partake in that eternal paradise. If this message has spoken to your heart and you feel the stirrings of that ancient battle within you, I encourage you to like this video and subscribe. Together, we can continue to uncover the hidden truths of the Bible, exploring the mysteries of creation, and learning the lessons that God has woven into every story. By subscribing, you are joining in this journey, helping to spread this message of hope and restoration to others. It costs you nothing, but it means everything. So hit that like button, share this video with those who need to hear this word, and let's continue to walk in the light of God's truth, ready for the victory that is already ours. Remember, the story of Eden is not just a historical account. It is a prophecy, a pattern that continues to unfold in our lives today. The flaming swords that guarded the entrance to the tree of life remind us that we are still in the midst of the spiritual battle. But the good news is that, through Christ, we have been given access to the eternal tree of life. The gates of Eden may have been closed, but the door to eternal life has been opened. Let us walk through that door, remembering that the victory was won long ago, and that the final restoration is still to come. So as we continue this journey together, let us stand firm in our faith, knowing that we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. The story of Eden has not ended. It is still being written in our lives. And the final chapter, the one where light triumphs over darkness, will be the greatest victory of all. May we remain faithful, ever watchful, and always hopeful for the paradise that awaits us, knowing that it is not just a distant dream, but a promise that will be fulfilled. Keep your heart focused on the eternal, and let us continue to seek the truth, the light, and the kingdom that is coming.